Hey guys, I'm Kalila Reynolds, and this is What's in It for Me, a partnership between myself and the Ministry of Finance. And this is where I explain certain things going on in the economy and how it's relevant to you. So in the last episode, I was talking about the IMF fund being over, and I interviewed the fund's Western Hemisphere Director, Alejandro Werner. And we're talking about how significant it was that this was the first time in 40 years that Jamaica has successfully completed an IMF program. We're on the path to economic recovery, and it's a pretty big deal. Now, of course, you always have your skeptics, and someone on Instagram commented the following. This IMF deal has no value or impact for the ordinary working Jamaican man. Poverty has increased, and more people are suffering. Tell the man who cannot feed his children about balance of payment and international reserve levels. He doesn't care about that. Now, I'm actually glad this person said that because it's exactly the reason we thought a What's in It for Me program was necessary. Most people hear these broad economic terms and they don't get how it relates to their everyday lives, but it most certainly does in more ways than you can even imagine. So you hear things like debt to GDP is down, and you think, first of all, I don't even know what that means. And secondly, what does that have to do with me? Well, I'm about to explain. GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product, is the total value of all the goods and services a country produces in a particular year. So in this analogy, I want you to think of it like your annual salary. Let's say you make $100,000 a month. That's $1.2 million a year. Now, we all know what debt is. It's money you owe to other people that you have to pay back plus interest. As we all know, Jamaica's debt has been exceptionally high for many, many years. So high, in fact, that by 2013, it had gotten to nearly 150% of GDP. And that means what we owed was more than what the entire country produces in a year and a half. Now, as you know with a loan, you don't pay back everything all at once. You pay it back piece, usually month by month. So as long as you can manage your monthly payments and still meet your other expenses like your light bill, your food, transportation, you should be okay. But in Jamaica's case, those debt repayments were taking up as much as 80% of our income. So let's say you're making that $100,000 a month. That means $80,000 was going straight back to the bank or whoever you borrowed it from, which leaves you with just $20,000 for the month for bus fare, food, picnic school fee, rent, and whatever other bills you have. Seems impossible, right? Even if you're making a decent income or salary, with that kind of debt level, you're virtually in poverty. And that's where Jamaica has just been stuck for many, many years due to unsustainable borrowing. Now, as impossible as it may seem, there is a way out if you're willing to do the hard work. And that's what we were forced to do under the IMF program. The IMF said, we'll lend you the money to help dig yourself out of this hole, but we have some conditions. First of all, you have to convince your creditors to take less. That's what the Jamaica Debt Exchange, JDX, and the National Debt Exchange, NDX, were. You have to cut back on expenses, so you can't give your workers a raise for X number of years, and in fact, you might have to let some of them go. And there were several other conditions as well. You get the idea, but you have to stick to the plan. We know you have elections and all that, and you'll be tempted to overspend. Don't do it. And amazingly, the government did stick to it. 2 administrations, in fact, which is really impressive, and it's been working. Debt is now down to 90-something% of GDP, which makes our debt repayments much more manageable. It frees up funds for all the things the government has to pay for. It can pay workers better, build better roads and schools, even pay its light bill. You may have heard about them paying off all their arrears to JPS the other day. They paid JPS $9.3 billion between January and March. Now, if it was us, JPS would just put a red tag on our meter, right, and cut off the light. But they don't play, because they don't play like that. But the government gets to have arrears to literally keep the lights on, and they finally paid up in full. That means JPS now has some cash flow to possibly make some improvements to their network and give us better service. Now, with government debt being down, you also see things like police stations being refurbished island-wide. more money given to schools so that our auxiliary fees aren't as high. And I know that's a controversial one because of how it's been implemented. We also see increases in social spending, so people on welfare, that's PATH, are getting more money. It's still not a whole lot, definitely not enough, but more than they were getting before. So we are seeing general improvements, and these things are the direct result of reducing our debt. In fact, the Ministry of Finance just announced a couple of weeks ago that the country is saving $2.5 billion in interest costs alone due to a couple of recent transactions aimed at debt reduction. They bought back some of their high-interest debt and issued new bonds at lower interest rates, among other things. And because the country has been doing such a good job over the past 6 years, the new bonds were actually oversubscribed. When else have you seen the international markets rushing to buy Jamaica bonds at 7%? Usually the only way they'll buy our bonds is if we offer ridiculously high interest rates to make it worth the risk to creditors. That's how we got stuck on this cycle. And if you want to understand a little bit more about bonds, I explained in a recent episode of Money Mondays, and you can check that out. Now back to the person who left the comment on my IG page. I did take the time to explain some of this to him briefly, and he responded by saying, "My concern has to do with the man on the street who's constantly asked to pay higher taxes, yet will never reap the rewards." Well, first of all, if you notice, we haven't had higher taxes these past couple of years. Last year, the tax package was flat, meaning no increases or decreases, and this year, there were actually tax cuts. So the person continued, "Government having more money to spend because of lower debt might not necessarily mean higher wages and better social services. It might well mean more money to plunder corruptly, while government spending is what got us here." Now that is a legit concern, and I can't blame him for feeling this way. I'm sure we all feel like this to some extent. That's why we have to keep a keen eye on what they're doing with our money. Corruption is the one thing that can send us right back to square one, that run with it mentality. Well, I hope I was able to make the link for you today and explain what's in it for me in partnership with the Ministry of Finance. I'm Kalila Reynolds. Thanks for watching.